let's go ahead and get started on the reassembly of this device. You can see that I have our old screen here. You can see that it has this little mark on it showing how far up the LCD cable is supposed to kind of bend up. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is just mark this down on our new assembly. Let's use this as our straight line here. We're just going to use a dry erase marker to go ahead and just write the line on here. You can see that we want it to actually kind of fold over at the bottom. We don't want it to kink. We don't want it to crimp into a straight line, as in the other device it's kind of folded and rounded at the bottom instead of being kinked. We definitely don't want to mess up the display touch functions. So since we're not transferring the fabric tape over, what we're going to do is actually use a little piece of 3M double-sided tape. We're just going to lay this down right above the line we just drew. And we're going to go ahead and just adhere our cable to the back of the device. The whole point of this is so that when we put the display back together, we don't crimp. That piece of tape got messed up, so I'm going to try again. The whole point of doing this is so that the cable doesn't get crimped when we're putting it back into the mid-frame. If we get it too kinked, it could distort touch functions or not work at all. We definitely don't want that to happen, since it's kind of a tedious process to take this device apart. So we're just going to go ahead and attach it to the back of the device like so. And this secondary cable here, we'll go ahead and just put a little tiny piece under it as well to make sure it doesn't kink. Now it is easier to do both of these at the same time if you can get them to line up correctly with the tape. My zoom's going a little crazy there. Or my focus, there we go. So now we have both parts of the cable pushed in and pressed down. So it's not kinking, it's got a rounded bottom edge. Alright, now my bezel is nice and clean. I took the time to go ahead and clean everything off of it. You want to do the same. I'm just going to take this thinner 1mm 3M double-sided tape. We're going to run it down the side of the device. Just going to use our dental pick here to make sure we adhere it down as snug to the side of the mid-frame as possible. We'll go ahead and cut the end here to fit. Just going to cut it down just to the right at the very bottom of the screen here. We'll go ahead and do the opposite side of the device. Just going to run this down the length of the side here. Use our dental pick to do the same thing. We want to make sure that the adhesive is stuck down nicely to the device. We don't want any wrinkles or crimps within the double-sided tape, as that may give it a portion to peel off or make the LCD not lay flat within the mid-frame of the phone. We're taking a thicker tape and we're going to go ahead and put it across the bottom here. This is either a 3mm or a 5mm tape. It doesn't necessarily matter what the thickness is. On the sides, the 1mm is the largest it'll go. We want to make sure that the tape doesn't go up the side of the device. We want it to sit all within the middle of the mid-frame. So we're going to make sure we cut this either a little bit too short or exactly perfect, right to the edge. We want to make sure we don't cover up the cable slot right down here at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to back this off. I'm going to use my pry tool. I'm going to push the tape in so it wraps around on the interior of the phone to make sure the hole is wide enough to push the cable through for the screen. So I'm just pushing it down onto the inside of the device here. We'll go ahead and use the same thin 1mm tape across the top up here to make sure we don't cover up any of the sensor ports, the camera, the front-facing speaker at all. Make sure you push down on the sides. We don't want it pilling up when we go to remove the backing off the tape. Just going to peel that off as that one's already been removed. Let's go ahead and peel off all the backing off the device. Alright, the next step is to go ahead and install the screen. It's going to be a little bit tricky. You may have to twist it and bend it. The goal is to put the longer L-shaped one in first. It takes me a second to realize that. Now we're just going to back it down and put it in exactly where it needs to be. Basically right where we taped it all off is going to be the perfect fit. Now if you're a little concerned about this, what you can do is use the covers up here at the top to make sure that it does fit properly, that you've lined it up correctly. I'm just going to use this as a measuring stick to see if it'll fit back in on the device. If so, that means we've done it correctly, which it will. You also want to make sure that you pull your cables all the way through. Now you don't want to pull on them once the glass is stuck to the mid-frame. You want to do that beforehand. We're just going to go around. We're going to press on all the sides, top and the bottom, the back of the frame to make sure everything sticks down nice and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some of the tape that got stuck down as we were working on the other side of the device to remove these ribbon cables. The next thing we're going to need to do is to put the battery back into the phone. So here we have our battery with the ribbon cable at the bottom left-hand corner. Make sure it's snug at the top so there's enough space at the bottom to go ahead and put the speaker in the bottom as well as the antenna cables as well. We're just going to rearrange this fabric tape a little bit and cut it to, if you've got it messed up, you can see that mine's a little bit wrinkled. We're just going to cut that part off. The goal is that this is going to hold the logic board to the interior of the device. Make sure all the cables look correct, nothing stuck underneath the battery. We'll go ahead and put our charging port board back into the device. It did have a little bit of adhesive on the other side, so I'm just pressing down to make sure it's going to stick in its rightful place. We can go ahead and put our rear speaker back on, or the bottom speaker I mean. Just making sure that fabric tape stays in its place. Next step is to go ahead and put our logic board back in. So we're going to wiggle it into the top position first. See the cable that I have my hand on, that's actually the board needs to go over that cable. You'll see you need to line the screw guides up at the top first, and then the bottom of the device should fit right back into place. There's a kind of a cutout right underneath the speaker at the bottom here. You want to make sure the cable for the bottom speaker is out from underneath the logic board as you shuffle this back into place. We're just going to wiggle it until we get it into the right spot. Make sure all the cables are out. Everything's where it should be. You may have to wiggle it back and forth a few times to get it to where you want it to be. It goes underneath the rear portion of the camera as well. Double checking to make sure everything looks correct. All the cables are accounted for. All the screw ports are lined up. Make sure all the cables are long enough and fitting in the right place before I start to screw in the logic board of the device. Everything looks good. We're going to go ahead and take our first screw and put it down here in the bottom corner of the phone, the bottom left-hand corner. We have two at the top of the device. Put in our second one at the top of the device. We're going to run this black wire cable down to its correct spot, the bottom portion of the logic board here. It's hard to miss exactly where it fits, as the current length will only allow it to go into the nearest connector to it. Going to try to guide it into the right spot so it doesn't get caught up. It kind of goes down between the logic board and the battery here. And there's a little piece of fabric tape down at the bottom that you can use to kind of keep it in place. It's being a little bit tricky. I'm going to go ahead and put in our first connector for at the top. We just want to make sure that we push it in as far as it can go. Normally you see just a very little tiny portion of the gold connectors on the ribbon cable sticking out. double check and make sure it's in nice and tight. You can go ahead and snap it down. Black wires has been a little bit tricky. We're just going to put a little bit of adhesive down for the digitizer cable here. The edge is a little bent back, so I'm just going to cut it off there. Alright, now before you stick this down, you want to make sure it's in the right spot. You can usually actually attach it to the port first, which is what I should have done. I'm going to have to pill it up here a little bit to get it into the right spot. Once you get in, you just go ahead and pop down the flip-up connector. You can push it down to the tape that you installed on the device. That'll hold the cable in place. You don't want it to be bent underneath the rear housing once we clip it back in. Go ahead and do the same on the opposite side of the device. This first cable is a little bit tricky as it's wrapped around underneath the logic board. There's not a lot of play or wiggle room on how to get it in. You might just have to use a nylon spudger if you can't get it in with your fingers. There we go. You may have to put down the volume cables onto the device to get the secondary cable in. There we go. So I'm going to go on down the list here and put all of these back together and back in their places. Here's our charge port cable back into its connecting slot as well. We'll go ahead and put down the power. And it's held in by 2 screws. Go ahead and reinsert those just real fast as well. First one's in, just one more to go. We can go ahead and reattach our bottom speaker cable here. It's a little bit tricky, it's a small connector. You need to make sure you get it into the right spot. Let's go ahead and put our black tape back over it. And go ahead and reattach the wire cables at the top. And we had the foam piece on it, so it looks like one cable, but it is 2. Go ahead and do the 2 for the bottom. Alright, we are looking good. Just going to connect a power source to this. I know that it was a little bit dead. We're going to let it charge for just a few seconds. Let's go ahead and fold out this tape while it charges. You can definitely see that the LCD has a picture, which is a great sign for us. So it looks like everything's going to work properly. Before I go through and put a lot of stuff down, I'm going to try to power it on and test it here real fast. We're at 1%. Try to power the device on. Perfect. So far, so good. We have the HTC picture. It's got the Verizon boot logo. Just going to test the touch function here real fast. Try the buttons down here, the home button. Perfect. Everything seems to be working great. Go ahead and power the device off. It's a little tricky to power on and off with just using this spudger. This power button's a little tricky. There we go. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and test or put the device back together, the remaining portions. The next step is to go ahead and take the fabric tape that we took off, and we're going to go ahead and try to reapply it. It should still be tacky enough to reappear or reapply it without it popping up too much. Just make sure it covers the connectors properly. We're going to lay down the top portion of the bottom side of the phone here first. This black tape will need to be covered up by the opposite side's fabric tape. Try to make sure it doesn't fold over on itself. Reapply the top portion of the fabric tape. Perfect. It looks almost as if we haven't done much to it. Do want to make sure we go ahead and reapply the volume button here as well. Just double checking the LCD, make sure that it's nice and tight before we snap the back onto its place. So we're going to take the back. We're going to go ahead and install it on the device. We do have this little tiny black rubber connector we took off from the flash sensor here. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall that before we put the back on. Unfortunately, my camera lost power, and I have to start from this part. Just putting the back on, which is where we left off in the last portion. We want to go ahead and put the power button in. You'll see that it has a bezeled edge. You want to make sure that faces towards the open end of the battery cover. You want to stick the charge port in first and snap down towards the power button. This is the easiest way to reassemble the back of the device. If you try to start with the power button first, then you'll have a hard time getting the charge port in. You want to make sure the power button still functions correctly, so just to press it and make sure it works. You can see a faint battery screen there, so the battery in this device is still dead. So we're going to go ahead and just attach a charging cable to it here in a second after we put some other pieces back on. We're going to go ahead and put our little front-facing bezels on. Make sure we line them up for the correct spots. We'll go ahead and put our screws in. We have the 4 Torx T5 screws at the bottom. We'll go ahead and insert those first. Those are the all black screws. Now I'm putting these in snug but not too tight. We don't want to strip out any of the screw threads on this phone, so just getting them nice and snug, but not to the point where I'm trying to really crank them down. We have the 2 screws for Phillips that go up at the top of the device. Here's the first one. And the second one. And with that, we are almost finished. We should go ahead and put our top and bottom portion on. So the all speaker portion goes down at the bottom. You'll feel it almost snap into place once you put it on. You may need to use some new adhesive down here. Just make sure you use a very thin or small portion of the double-sided 3M tape. Normally it's still got enough to kind of hold everything together. Go ahead and snap the top portion back in. You can use a little bit of heat and then press down that way as well. Perfect. So we are looking good. The screen looks great. I'm just grab a charge cable here real fast. We can go ahead and plug this in and just double check the touch functions of the phone. Make sure everything's still working properly for us. Let's go ahead and power the device on. Take a few seconds to boot up. Now, if you found this video useful, go ahead and hit the like button for me. I'd really appreciate that. If you want to subscribe to me for any new videos, I do a lot of devices out there. I'll try to do as many as I possibly can. A few more tablets, hopefully upcoming as well. Hit the subscribe button. If you have any comments, throw them down in the comments section as well. You can see that the touchscreen is definitely working for us. I really appreciate you guys watching the videos. As always, I'll see you in the next one.